Hello, everyone. I'm really sorry for cannot attend the conference in person, but I'm very glad I have eventually have a chance to present our paper, which titled as Uncovering Non-Native Speakers' Experience in Global Software Development Teams. So, Bodinson perspective. So the author is written by four authors. Of course, the first author is me, with the second author Yang Yue, and the third author Wei Wang, and the fourth author Gao Wei Zhang. So basically, if you wonder how it looks like, so you can refer to the picture here. The paper is roughly about 40 pages in the journal. And but today I only have 20 minutes, so I will briefly introduce a little bit about the motivation and the related work in our theoretical foundations as Bourdieu's capital fields habitus framework and our research methods and the results and findings as some important implications. Motivation. So basically, global software development often involves a large amount of developers from multiple countries around the world. Of course, they speak different language, and to let the people speaking different language to collaborate. So you might have English to be lingua franca to facilitate interpersonal communication. And unfortunately, language issues in global software development were largely neglected in CSAW and software engineering literature, partially resulting from we always emphasize on the technical merit in computing professions. But we neglect that people have different levels of English, and they probably have created a certain kind of social and interpersonal outcomes. So we want to develop understanding of the experience of the GSD developers who are non-native English speaker, particularly how non-native speakers in certain language proficiency reproduce their sustained and systematic disadvantage positions in GSD teams. So bear this in mind. And regarding the related literature, so in CCW and software engineering, related work mostly focuses on online communication happening in multiple venues such as social media and work teams, and multilingual speakers language practice. And often the researcher design and implement systems and tools to support multi-language communications. In other research community, for example, organization behavior or international business, which basically broadly belong to the management domain, related work often focus on how natural spoken language and their very specific subtle features affect various processes and outcomes in global organizations. So, but basically, we can see that the extant literature in the GSD context is often fragmented, scattered, and difficult to synthesize. So, our study is designed to fill such a gap. Let's have a brief look about our theoretical foundation is Bourdieu's capital field habitus framework. And in his classical writing, outline of a theory of practice, Pierre Bourdieu proposed the capital field habitus framework as a critique to the emphasizing of the individual agents in organizations. And therefore, Bourdieu argued that actors, that is, individuals cannot be separated from the context where they are embedded in exploring individual context in interrelationships, especially think about the situation in our context. So that when we want to understanding the individual's experience, and we cannot separate the global software development, the developers in this GSD teams. So some people may feel difficult to understand what is individual agency. The concept of individual agency usually refers to the situation that individuals act at their own will to fulfill their potential and goals. So assume that you have the ability and you have the intention, and that is enough. So, but in many cases, it's not enough. Many things could be institutional, right? So, in such a framework, capitals are multidimensional and no longer only related to the economic asset and resource. Capital could be in many types. Some frequently used capital include social capital, cultural capital, and something else. Fields are the context of actors to realize and convert their capitals, as well as the value for actors to compete for power. Individuals with limited capital often have to accept the rules defined by the people who have a lot of capital, passively take what is left for them, and wait for opportunities to gain some advantage. Habitus refers to a set of dispositions to act in a certain way, is usually assumed to be shared practice produced by individual internalization of the social expectations and value systems in relation to a specific field. It enables individuals to display the correct behavior and practice to fit the dominant group's taste. So you know that it's defined by the dominant group. In the dominant group, you usually have a lot of capital, right? And both those three concepts are interrelated and dynamic. So first, the organization's dominant group use different types of capital to construct and maintain social status and power distinctions compared to others, legitimizing and protecting their position in their social hierarchy in the organization. Actors' involvement in fields shapes their habits, which then determines their acts on many occasions. Once the member act as expected, those fields and the rules of them were reproduced and reinforced. Through this process, the theory illuminated how embeddedness of actor in a field, especially in the context, makes them legitimize, reproduce, and reinforce the rules by performing socially expected habitus. So now, later we will see how we connected the framework with our study. So let's look at some basics about the research method we use. First, regarding the research design context, we take our main approach is quantitative inquiry. So we it's basically based on two reasons. First is we want to investigate a largely unexplored term, and we want to learn complex dynamics and rich context around the non-native English speakers' experience in global software development. So, without knowing a lot of the theoretical constructs, doing a qualitative study may actually help us to collect as much as possible data, and we derive some kind of the insights. So the target population is software developers from China. So why we chose China? China has long linguistic distance away from English. And Chinese is a high context language, while English is a low context language. And international software development organizations often have some operations in China, offer many opportunities for local Chinese software developers to engage in global development teams. And finally, China has one of the largest population of open source contributors, so which enable us to get the data from both the open source developers and the commercial software development the developers. So, and we have 27 participants, and we recruit them through purposeful sampling, and 11 from open source, 16 from commercial development. They have diverse roles, language skills, and experience. And regarding the data collection, we take the semi-structured interview as the main method to collect the data. So we didn't directly start from asking the interviewee questions about their language process. We actually letting the topics related to the experience as a non-native English speaker emerge naturally along the process of interview, rather than we directly asking specific questions. We ask some sample questions like, what is your experience in this project? What your difficulties? Something like that. And when we do data analysis, we follow the abductive logic. So it's the figure here actually illustrates a little bit about the difference between the inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning and abductive reasoning. So we actually has a very incomplete observations. We by taking the Bode's theoretical framework will make some best guesses, and this may be true, of course. but it has certain level of the explanation power. So we're filtering all the related narratives first, and then applying a standard qualitative data analysis procedure. And the critical step is performing the theoretical memo writing and concept refinement and the capital field habitat framework in Bourdieu's theory of practice. And before we go to the details of our findings, we actually have some overview of the findings. So basically, you can see in the organizational fields, and we actually have four types of capital: language capital, social capital, symbolic capital, and economic capital. So the fields organization basically the global software engineering team they have certain kind of language habitus, and we in fact all the process here, and you can find the language capital could influence the social capital, could influence the symbolic capital, and both of them will have some impact on the economic capital, and language capital also directly related to the economic capital. And these four types of the capital also have some interaction with open fields, because the open source development was become prevalent in software development world. So many people, although they are commercial developers, are also participating in open source development, which constitute a certain kind of the open fields. Basically, and if we use two sentences to say what we found, so actually we found four types of capital, and we found non-native speakers' insufficient language capital play an essential role in prohibiting them from accessing and accumulating other capital, thus reproducing their sustained and systematic disadvantaged position in global software development teams. Let's have a look at the first types of capital, language capital. Language capital have three types of language capital. The first one is language elements. It's usually two things were pretty important. So the first one is accent, the second one is word choice. So I have accent, right? It's fun, for many non-native speakers, which makes them being mimicked by some native speaker. Even in our data show that. And there is also some kind of the culture-related language capital. And the non-native speaker has limited knowledge about cultural practice, and particularly language technologies like machine translation provide little help in gaining culture-related language capital. Last one is common knowledge related language capital. It's not language knowledge, but every common knowledge of the native speaker could have. Here, the sample quote give the example. So it's basically about a Super Bowl. In Super Bowl, that the non-native speaker have a little knowledge about that. So they cannot get fully involved in the interaction with other native speakers. The second type is social capital. Social capital also have three things. The first one is social network. It could be the non-native speaker could be being isolated by native speakers, and they also take the position that isolating native speakers, they have their own cycle. And if you're interested about that, you can look at the sample codes here. And they often lack shared understandings. They are being restricted in developing shared understanding because of they don't have a necessary language skills, and their limited language proficiency also makes them have wrong interpretations about the situation. And the last one is developing of the trust. The lacking language capital prevents the development of trust, and also using modern language technology, as what I said, using machine translation would threaten the native language's trust in them. They always because the machine translation is not that perfect. And when the native speaker detects that you're using the machine translation, they usually think you are not capable to do something. And the third one is symbolic capital. Symbolic capital is actually, we could divide it into two parts. So the first one is internal symbolic capital. The second one is external symbolic capital. So of course, limited language capital restricts their access to internal symbolic capital. If your language is not good, you are often have little opportunity to being recognized as an expert in your team, right? And regarding the external symbolic capital, there is two things bear us attention. The first one is the symbolic capital accumulated in non-native speakers' home country is hard to translate to those English-speaking countries. We have some example in our paper, so you can look at it. And the limited language capital hinders their opportunity to be recognized in international venue. And you can find the sample quotes here. So basically, the participants told us that they have to ask the other people's help to apply for the IEEE senior members. And actually, with the introduction of the open fields, for example, actually that is open source development. So the symbolic capital could be accumulated through the open source participation. So which help the people gain and realize symbolic capital. Actually, non-native speakers sometimes actively take this chance to do that. They participate into the open source development and make that, while they have a difficulty in their own organizations. In the open source, actually help if they become recognized as expert in the open source, in the open field, they actually help them to gain some organizational capital in their commercial organization too. The last one is economic capital. So eventually, the economic capital, we actually have two things. The first one is task restriction. And we found that because of the insufficient language capital, the non-native speaker usually being locked into a narrow set of the task. And they also have a disadvantaged position in the performance evaluation and career advancement. Insufficient language capital has both direct and indirect impacts. For example, they could be lead to the lack of the symbolic capital, and the limited symbolic capital eventually turns to the limited economic capital. And but in parallel, in contrast, rich language, social, and symbolic capital gained from contribution to the open source project would help career advance in multiple ways. It's offset the negative effect in the organization because of the introduction of the open fields. And also we have some sample codes here. And now let's have a look at some implications. First, regarding the theoretical implications. Boudou's perspective could be a theoretical underpinnings for researching global software engineering. And first of all, it helps us to explain how GSD developers' non-native English proficiency could be barrier to accessing and accumulating career critical capitals, and which in turn reproduce and reinforce their disadvantaged position in GSD teams. And it also could be applied to many other topics in the human and social aspect of software engineering. For example, gender diversity in software engineering, and how our system, how the software engineering industry put the gender reproducing the female or other genders or the non-binary genders disadvantage in the software engineering, which is actually could be explained by the Boudou theory. Boudou's theory also could be enhanced by incorporating the concept of open fields resulting from the open source practice. So, which actually we by studying the phenomena in the software development, we actually have some contribution to the theoretical, to original theory. Regarding the practical implications, we basically want to say the non-native English speaker should be encouraged to have the positive attitudes towards their own language capability. And the non-native English speaker may acknowledge the challenge and difficulties faced by peer non-native speakers in acquiring sufficient language capital. And using modern machine translation tools should be legitimized and encouraged, particularly now we have LLM, which could do translation work pretty well. I'm really sorry if I cannot take the questions in person, but if you have any question, just shoot me a note. So finally, thank you everyone. I really hope I could be there in person, but unfortunately, maybe see you guys next year. Bye. Thank you.